Welcome to everyone who's watching this recording. I'm the president of the Franco-British Lawyers Society, the Association des Juristes Franco-Britanniques, and we recorded our first webinar last Friday on the 3rd of July. And we got a lot of requests, very gratifying, to have access to the recording of what our distinguished panel had to say on that occasion last Friday. Now, since there were some technical glitches when the recording started, I'm today re-recording the introduction. And the eagle-eyed among our membership would note that the background, not to speak of the haircut, have changed since last Friday. You, I hope, will note that I'm wearing a suit, as all lawyers are unable to speak to a large gathering without now, this is our first remote event as a society. And the idea was the Scottish section in January wanted to put together a congress at Glasgow University, considering the progress, this would be in midsummer, we thought, with the establishment of the settling of the terms of Brexit. Now, there were problems in setting the date, and then, of course, the monster virus intervened. So today, we are hosted with Glasgow University, and we have indeed a distinguished panel. That's a matter for satisfaction, even pride. But sadly, instead of reporting on the progress which has been made in connection with the settlement with the EU 27, I'm afraid we have to discuss a grave lack of that progress. Now, let me be clear, this isn't a meeting which is intended to rerun or reverse or lament the political choice that Brexit constituted. That question was asked, it was asked 4 years ago, and it was answered 4 years ago, and it has subsequently been endorsed by 2 general elections in the UK. So the UK is outside the European Union. I am no longer a judge in its court in Luxembourg. The political ship sailed on the 1st of February this year. However, it remains the case that for nearly 50 years, the UK has regulated collectively with its European partners many aspects of daily life. Pilots' licenses, pharmaceuticals, feed additives, police cooperation, animal welfare, pensions, competition. The list is a very long one. We need to know what rules will apply from January next year to take the place of the current regime, which was drafted under EU procedure. So during the Brexit referendum and during the 3 years after the referendum, the debate focused on the big principle of whether and maybe on how, but there was little discussion on the what. What did Brexit really mean in concrete practical terms? And then came the virus, which completely preoccupied all political discourse. So here we are, beginning of July, with only 6 months to go, and we're still confronting the question of how to regulate the many fields which cannot not be regulated. Europe, you might say, is a small continent. Geography in Europe compels cooperation. There's at least 100 big subjects which need to be addressed. So, in my personal view, far from ending the uncertainty, which is the argument for not leaving any later than the 1st of January, far from ending the uncertainty, quitting the European Union without deciding how to regulate scores of sensitive matters seems likely to provoke uncertainty, not to say confusion and disorder. And I think that's not what the British people voted for. Having mentioned people, I remind us that some 4 million citizens are living outside their birth country and they are in a state of limbo. Their welfare should concern us all, including, notably, our political leaders. So these themes, which were very big 4 years ago, still remain big, and they're now becoming urgent. We have a distinguished panel to review 4 of these topics. First, we have the Principal and Vice-Chancellor of Glasgow University, Sir Anton Muscatelli. The Lord Advocate, Wolffe, who is, among his other attributes, in charge of the prosecution of crime in Scotland and in charge of cooperation between police in Scottish jurisdiction and other jurisdictions in the EU 27. Then we have Maître Stephane Bonifassi of the Paris Bar to talk about the practical problems confronting French businesses, French citizens, French institutions of all kinds. And finally, my esteemed colleague, I suppose I should say former colleague, Advocate General Eleanor Sharpson QC. Then, as an end piece, my mentor, my former master at the bar, and my predecessor as a judge in Luxembourg, Sir David Edward QC, will give a summation and an attempt to draw some conclusions. Before we start, I'd like to thank the law school of this university for the contribution to getting us launched. And I note the welcome presence in the audience of the participants of a number of final year students. And to our French members, a slight majority of the participants, I'd guess, are native English speakers, but we really welcome a contingent from France. Donc, vous pouvez sans hésitation poser vos questions éventuelles en français le moment venu. Et bien sûr, si vous n'êtes pas encore inscrit comme membre, vous êtes toujours le bienvenu, mais je vous demande gentiment que vous écoutiez dans l'esprit de ne pas être fermé à la possibilité de devenir membre par après. In other words, if you're not a member, that's fine, please stay. But listen with the thought that after it's over, you might decide to join. Now, on the day last Friday, we began by asking a technically competent member of the Society's team, Mia Forbes-Perry, to give an explanation of how to use the technical facilities of Zoom. And that's where we'll go now.
Thank you, Ian. Just so that everyone knows, I'm a member of the committee of FBLS, and in my normal life, I'm a mediator, which has given me some Zoom skills under lockdown. So that's why I've been charged with this task. We'll see how successful it is. So there's 3 things really I want to outline to you. One If you have any technical questions at any point during today, please just address them to me in the chat. That's the only time you'll need to use the chat today. And if you do that personally or privately, if you click on the right-hand corner, top right-hand corner of my image, you'll see 3 dots and the drop-down menu will come down. You'll be able to chat and just ask me anything you need to ask me so it doesn't disturb anyone else. That would be fantastic. Mostly we'll take questions, written questions to save time. So when you have a question, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, there's a thing called Q&A. And if you click on Q&A, you'll be able to type in your question and then it'll be addressed. We may or may not have time to address all questions, but we will do our best. So please pop your question in there. And anything you write or you send, you click return to make it go off. And I think the last thing I wanted to say is that this session is being recorded, so you will all get a recording of the session at some point after the end of today's session. I think that's it. Have I missed anything?
I believe not.
Wonderful.
So let us have our first contributor. I know he's there because I saw him a moment ago, and that's Anton Muscatelli, the principal of the university and also one of the advisors of the First Minister of Scotland. Anton. Anton?
I think we may have lost Anton temporarily. So maybe if can anyone else jump in and start?
Right.
And we'll try and get him back on.
Very well. Do you want me to? James Wolffe, let me say that the plan is each speaker has 15 minutes and then there's questions at the end. Since each of the speakers has obligations, if they're going to leave early, they'll let me know and we can fire at the end of their intervention any particular question. James Wolffe, you were unsure whether you could stay with us to the end. Are you going to be able to do that, or are you not sure?
I'm afraid I won't be able to, Ian.
Okay.
I've got other things I need to attend to. So.
Then if anyone has a question for the Lord Advocate, we'll take that at the end of his intervention. So let us now hear from James Wolffe, QC, Her Majesty's Advocate.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ian. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. I should perhaps explain for non-Scottish viewers that as Lord Advocate, I am head of the systems for the prosecution of crime and investigation of deaths in Scotland. So I think my presence on this panel is, as much as anything else, to remind you of the importance of cooperation in the field of criminal justice. And I should say those functions which I exercise are functions which I exercise independently of any other person. And although given the responsibilities of that office, there are constraints on what I can say at this time, I hope I can say something which is relevant to the topic that you've presented us with. And I am sorry I can't stay after I've spoken. My responsibilities as Lord Advocate include functions in relation to extradition and mutual legal assistance, functions which are fulfilled on my behalf by specialist prosecutors in the International Cooperation Unit of the Crown Office here in Edinburgh. That unit deals with incoming and outgoing requests for extradition and mutual legal assistance. And although some requests come through the UK Central Authority or the National Crime Agency, the International Cooperation Unit, my International Cooperation Unit, deals directly with its counterparts in other jurisdictions. And it's perhaps just making a couple of structural points which may be of interest to in a seminar run by the Franco-British Lawyers Society about the Scottish criminal justice system. First, that all prosecutions in Scotland are brought by public prosecutors within the system for which I'm responsible. And secondly, that as in France, but by contrast with England and Wales, the police are subject to direction from the public prosecutor. And that particular feature of the system facilitates international cooperation because of the ability of my prosecutors to direct their counterparts in Police Scotland in relation to the investigation of, in relation to fulfilment of requests from their counterparts elsewhere. We were reminded yesterday and today just how necessary and important international cooperation in the field of criminal justice is. Scottish viewers who read the Daily Record will have seen the following front page headline today. Operation Venetic, the biggest gangland bust ever. Scots snared in huge international crime sting. Cops crack gangsters' encrypted phone network. Cash, drugs, guns and explosives seized. Those headlines and similar reports in other news outlets yesterday and today refer to a major law enforcement operation lasting some 3 months and directed at serious organised crime across a number of jurisdictions. The operation was led by the police in France and the Netherlands and involved Europol, as well as other national police forces, including the UK National Crime Agency and Police Scotland. In Scotland, this operation has resulted in over 50 arrests, as well as the seizure of substantial quantities of illicit drugs, firearms, and other items. Those reports remind us that some of the most damaging forms of criminality with which we deal are inherently transnational. Serious organised crime, which may involve trafficking in goods, including illicit drugs and firearms, trafficking in human beings for sexual and labour exploitation, and cybercrime, which by its nature recognises no national boundaries. And whilst most crime remains entirely domestic in nature, the mobility of people, goods and capital means that even in the context of traditional forms of criminality, a transnational dimension may not infrequently arise simply because the accused or a witness or relevant evidence required for a criminal case here in Scotland is located in another jurisdiction, or because an accused or a witness required for a criminal case or evidence required for a case in another jurisdiction is located here. So we should be in no doubt, if we are to protect our communities and our citizens from crime and to play our part in maintaining the rule of law internationally, about the importance of effective criminal justice cooperation between national prosecutors and national law enforcement agencies. And equally, we should be in no doubt that police and prosecutors will wish, regardless of the changing constitutional and legal landscape, to continue to cooperate with their counterparts in other jurisdictions with a view to protecting our communities and our citizens from crime and to play our part in maintaining the international rule of law. The question which the title of this seminar invites us to address is how cooperation will work post-Brexit. Even within the field of criminal justice cooperation, that's an enormous subject. So I'm going to focus specifically on extradition. But extradition sits within a suite of other arrangements for cross-border cooperation, including in the EU regime, legal instruments which support mutual legal assistance, notably the European Investigation Order, and institutional arrangements which support practical cooperation between national police forces and national prosecutors. Legal instruments are necessary to provide a framework for cooperation, and because we're concerned fundamentally with a legal process which affects individual rights. And I'm going to look specifically at legal instruments in respect of extradition. But I've also seen how, in practice, the smooth and effective operation of the legal mechanisms is facilitated by the professional relationships which Scottish prosecutors are able to have with their counterparts through Eurojust and the judicial network. Relationships which allow issues to be identified and problems resolved so that the legal mechanisms can be operated effectively and fairly. So let me turn to look specifically at extradition. And I think the starting point is to describe where we have come from, and perhaps to remind ourselves that extradition traditionally, and I'm looking at extradition generally and outside the arrest warrant system, involved both judicial and ministerial involvement, with the courts determining whether or not extradition would be lawful, and ministers making the final decisions on extradition. The requesting state would traditionally have to satisfy the responding state there was a proper basis for the prosecution, and would have to show that the alleged actions would be crimes in both the requesting and responding states, the principle of dual criminality. And many states decline to extradite their own nationals, although that is not our tradition. The European Arrest Warrant system, as is well known, simplified and streamlined that process. It is a system of surrender predicated on mutual recognition of judicial procedures between the jurisdictions of the EU. And it's important that it's an entirely judicial procedure with no role for ministers. The warrant is issued by a judge. It's transmitted directly from prosecutor to prosecutor. And the decision on extradition in the requested state is also entirely judicial. Dual criminality does not need to be satisfied in respect of a list of categories of crime, and the arrest warrant system trumps even the constitutional protections in some EU states against extradition of their own nationals. And although on occasion the proceedings can become relatively protracted, for example, where issues arise as to whether the conditions of detention in the requesting state would be compatible with convention rights, as a general rule under the arrest warrant system, surrender is secured relatively swiftly and relatively straightforwardly. So that's where we've come from. Where are we now? Well, as we know, the UK has since 31st of January no longer been a member state. We are in a transition period which is due to expire on the 31st of December. The withdrawal agreement between the UK and the EU provides for the continued execution of most requests for cooperation issued until 31st December 2020. So the previous legal regime for extradition at this moment, to all intents and purposes, remains in effect, subject only to the ability of member states to make a declaration that they may refuse to extradite their own nationals to the United Kingdom within the transition period. A power that's been exercised by Germany, Slovenia and Austria. Requests which are outstanding on 31st December will continue to be administered under the existing law in terms of the withdrawal agreement and to be subject to the jurisdiction of the CJEU. And these include European arrest warrants where the accused has been arrested prior to that date. So that's where we've come from and where we are now. What does the future hold? Well, if there's an agreement between the UK and the EU on a comprehensive security treaty, then plainly the terms of that treaty will apply to judicial cooperation thereafter. At this stage, the outcome of that negotiation is unknown, and all that we can do is identify the preferred outcomes which have been publicly disclosed by the parties. The UK government has made clear in its paper, The Future Relationship with the EU, that the UK is not seeking to participate in the European Arrest Warrant. But it does seek an agreement which would, and I'm quoting, provide for fast-track extradition arrangements based on the EU's surrender agreement with Norway and Iceland, but with appropriate further safeguards for individuals beyond those in the European Arrest Warrant. And both the UK draft legal text and the EU text appear to contain broadly similar aspirations, akin for extradition to the model of cooperation which the EU has in that agreement with Norway and Iceland, and in the context of mutual legal assistance, a hybrid European investigation order style request. So let me look briefly at the Norway-Iceland agreement with the EU. And I should say I'm told that experience of its operation would suggest that it is an effective instrument. In its overall approach, it is similar to the arrest warrant regime, although there are some differences. The two most significant are that under Article 3 of that agreement, dual criminality is in general a precondition for extradition, although there is scope for the parties to make a declaration that they will not require dual criminality where the offence appears on a list of offences set out in that article, and which carries a penalty in the requesting state of at least 3 years imprisonment. And the second difference from the arrest warrant regime is that although Article 7 prescribes a general rule that enforcement of a warrant may not be refused on the grounds that the person in question is a national of the enforcing state, the article goes on to empower any state party to make a declaration that it will not extradite its own nationals. So two significant qualifications on the arrest warrant regime. I should perhaps touch on what happens if there is no agreement and observe that that does not mean that international criminal justice cooperation with our European colleagues will cease. In the absence of an agreement to be implemented at the end of the transition period, it is anticipated that in terms of subordinate legislation which has been made in the UK, all EU member states will be redesignated as what are described as Part 2 territories for the purpose of the Extradition Act. The international legal basis for extradition will be the Council of Europe Convention on Extradition of 1957 and its protocols. And for mutual legal assistance, the legal base will be the Council of Europe Convention on Mutual Legal Assistance of 1959. And these are instruments with which my international cooperation unit is well used to working, although I don't think it would be controversial to observe that the extradition process in respect of Part 2 territories and under those conventions is slower and more cumbersome than the arrest warrant system. And in particular, the Council of Europe Convention requires satisfaction of the dual criminality requirement and permits states to decline to extradite their own nationals. So perhaps in conclusion, I can just make the following observations. The first is that we will continue to seek to maximize our ability to cooperate with counterparts in other jurisdictions within whatever legal regime may apply. We cooperate with many jurisdictions around the world under different legal arrangements, and we will continue to cooperate with our European colleagues and to employ the mechanisms available to that end. Secondly, though, goodwill and the good relationships which we enjoy with counterparts in other jurisdictions are not enough. International criminal justice cooperation cannot take place without an appropriate legal regime. As I said earlier, we're concerned with individual rights which require to be protected, and criminal investigations as well as the extradition or surrender of suspects have to take place in accordance with the law. And an effective response to criminality is facilitated if the legal mechanisms are robust and effective in enabling us to recover evidence from other jurisdictions, to secure the surrender or extradition of individuals who are wanted for trial here, and to assist our counterparts in other jurisdictions, and to do all these things timeously, effectively and fairly. The third point I should make is that regardless of whether there is a negotiated outcome or a non-negotiated outcome, there will be a legal basis for continued cooperation. And the Crown will work within that legal framework. From a criminal justice perspective, there would be significant benefits in a negotiated outcome which facilitates the process. In its paper, Security, Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice, the UK government outlined a single overriding aim of affording maximum protection to our citizens, with a primary objective to minimise operational disruption for UK and EU law enforcement agencies and judicial authorities. And that is, I think, an aim with which we can all, I hope, agree. As I said earlier, at this stage, I don't think we can speculate on the outcome, but I will certainly do what I properly can within my sphere of responsibility, both to secure maximum protection for our citizens and to minimise operational disruption for UK and EU law enforcement agencies and judicial authorities within whatever framework we are left with. Thank you.
Ian, you're still muted.
Yes, am I now audible? Yes.
Yes.
James Wolffe, we're really very grateful to you. I know that your appearance here required a considerable amount of effort with your friendly but diligent and protective team, and it's super to have had your insights. And I must say, I listen with great concern. You put it in a very mild, intelligible, simple manner, offering some reassurance, but there is still, I think, cause for quite a lot of concern. Now, because there's things going on in the Scottish criminal justice system today, does anyone have a question or an observation to raise regarding what James Wolffe has said?
Might I ask a question?
Simon Horsington, please do.
One of the great fears at the moment is the encroaching power and lack of rule of law from the Chinese People's Republic. Do you think that whichever way you see progress, that there will be an ability to maintain the international rule of law?
James?
James, you're muted.
Sorry.
So it's one of the things that happens on Zoom. Everything's a little more clunky, and we just have to bear with that. Go ahead.
So, I mean, I have to confess, I'm not going to answer that question because it's way out with my my sphere of responsibilities. You know, I'm very focused, it's fair to say, on the practical institutional arrangements for cooperation between criminal justice, law enforcement and prosecutorial agencies, and with the importance to that work of international criminal justice cooperation of a legal regime which supports and facilitates the fair and effective, and I put both of those together, fair and effective, effective and fair operation of criminal justice across borders, recognizing as we do that among the most serious threats that we face in the criminal justice sphere are threats from which are in their nature, as I observed earlier, transnational. And as I say, if you look at your newspapers today, you will see a striking example of the importance and the value of cooperation and the benefits which we derive from the instruments that we currently are party to.
Right. Is there one last question for the Lord Advocate, in failing which you can go and continue to chase criminals? And I'm not hearing anything. Do we have Anton Muscatelli back with us?
Yes, Ian, I'm back. Apologies, my internet crashed, so thank you for
we are
patience.
Well familiar. So, welcome, and we see behind you the tower of Glasgow University, regardless of where you actually are at this moment. And we look forward to hearing what you have to tell the group, which is now just over 100, just under 100, about your concerns.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that kind introduction. Can I thank the Franco-British Lawyers Society for bringing us all together today in this webinar. And as you said, Ian, at the beginning, our law school here at the university of Glasgow is proud to be a joint virtual host of today, today's event. But I do hope that we'll be able to welcome you in person very soon. I was going to start just with the title of this event because, of course, at the end of uncertainty, and perhaps in civil servant parlance, is probably what may constitute a brave impulse as far as Brexit is concerned, as uncertainty has been the one constant which has bound the last 4 years together. But as I say, hope springs eternal, and as you said eloquently in your introduction, really we're beyond the point of decision. So this is the moment to zero in on the practical implications of Brexit and what this pertains for our society, the economy, and our institutions. I should say at the start, I'm speaking very much as principal of the University of Glasgow and as an economist. Although I do chair the First Minister's Standing Council in Europe, as I always like to emphasise on these occasions, and of course Sir David Edward is also a member of that. We are a group of independent experts, and we do not speak on behalf of government. With that in mind, and since we have so many distinguished legal experts in the panel, I really want to focus my remarks squarely on some of the economic issues we face at the moment and how they interface with Brexit, and on the practical ramifications for higher education, which is certainly a preoccupation for me in my day job. So I wanted to also touch on Horizon Europe and the European research area and our collaboration in that field, including access to talent, as well as referencing the points where Brexit and COVID-19 intersect and the challenges that these present for us. But again, before I get there, just briefly dusting off my Brexit crystal ball and reflect on where we are and what the next few months might hold in store. I think the economic impact of Brexit has been well analysed, so apologies if there's little that is new in my remarks. As you know, you said, we are now past the point where the transition can be extended formally under the withdrawal agreement. This is hardly unexpected. The UK's government position has been clear for some time, but it really drives home the fact that there is very little space, less than 4 months, for agreement to be struck and for ratification to begin. And really, I mean, from my point of view, it's highly concerning that negotiations continue to suffer from a lack of momentum. Another round of talks began on Monday but ended early, and the media headlines this week have centred on a dust-up over continued market access for UK-based financial firms, which is important but is certainly not the most controversial item left on the to-do list. And really is concerning, as I say, that there is such clear blue water that separates the negotiating teams. From the legal governance of any agreement to the rules regulating a level economic playing field to specific endemic issues such as fisheries, the parties are as far apart as they ever were. And really, if an accord is to be finalised, then, as we are aware, very significant concessions are required on both sides. By my reckoning, I think this is now probably the 5th no-deal deadline that as institutions we've had to prepare for, and I think the best thing that can be said about this is that at least the feeling is familiar. But I think it is very significant that organisations such as the CBI, which have always argued for a deal and for an extension of the transition, and indeed before Brexit of an extension to negotiations, are now backing away from calling for the transition period to be extended. I think even organisations like the CBI and other industrial organisations are in the realm of preparing for the worst and hoping for a more optimal outcome, which now looks at the very best a very slim deal, if at all possible, around tariff-free trade in goods. Now, I know others will speak more about the road ahead, so I won't say much more about this, but I'd like to briefly reference recent analysis published by the Scottish Government, which is certainly analysis we would endorse as independent experts. And this highlighted that ending transition on December the 31st would probably result in Scottish GDP being between 1.1 billion and 1.8 billion lower compared to extending the transition by a year. Now, I'm not seeking to make a political point here. Believe me, I'm very happy to leave that to the politicians, but as an economist, I feel free to venture an economic view. In the context of the COVID-19 crisis, there are some who argue that not having a deal now would make little difference, that the pandemic has changed the game, and a shock which could have rocked the UK previously would now register as a mere tremor. But I think this analysis, confuses the point, because the effects of no deal would not be masked by COVID-19. Instead, no deal would likely accentuate and broaden the economic hit. Not least, and this is the key point, because there isn't a strong correlation between the sectors impacted by COVID and those impacted by Brexit. So the effects of the two are absolutely cumulative. And the only silver lining of COVID in terms of the EU-UK trade talks is that arguably the COVID crisis, I suppose, makes the EU more amenable to reaching a trade deal in the short run. You may have seen the speech this week by the Chief Economist of the Bank of England, Andy Haldane, and he pointed out that recent GDP figures, such as the 20.4% fall in April, with record declines in services, production, manufacturing and construction, are already redundant as the crisis is evolving very rapidly. And he's using real-time data, which does lead him to believe that the economy is recovering faster than expected, but he also warned about a negative feedback loop caused by rising unemployment. And at the moment, all of us are in the market for good news. So even if Andy Haldane remains an outlier on the bank's monetary policy committee, I think it's, the reason I mentioned what he said today is just as evidence of how uncertain the outlook is for the UK economy. Yes, we've had recessions before, but I don't think there's any examples in history of this kind of self-imposed economic shutdown, such as COVID, and how we recover thereafter. So we really are in uncharted waters. But if the speed and scale of any bounce back from COVID remains our trillion-dollar question, I think one thing is certain: government borrowing is now at levels never seen in peacetime. And the resulting higher debt levels will have major ramifications. It's maybe fashionable to argue that such obligations can be wished away by direct monetary financing, but unfortunately arguments don't win the day just because they are in vogue. I'm not a fan of those who argue that monetary financing is an open checkbook. My view is much more orthodox in this regard. Government spending is a claim on real resources, and this has to be financed either directly through future taxes and growth, or lower future spending, or via inflation. And so, coming back to Brexit, if this is the backdrop to a no-deal scenario, then there's really little reason to be sanguine, especially when the OECD is forecasting that the UK will experience the deepest downturn amongst advanced nations in the next year, and that is if we avoid a second wave of the pandemic. And my view here is shaped not just as an economist, but as the leader of a university that's been engaged in crisis management over the last few months. So all sectors have been impacted by COVID, but of course higher education has been heavily impacted. And we have a model of how we work as universities, which is predicated on a large amount of movements across the world. And most of us as international university welcome significant and growing numbers of students. And this has been a virtuous circle, because young people benefit from a world-class university education, our local areas are enriched by their talent, and universities use the income generated from that movement to cross-subsidize important civic activities, as well, of course, as an important element which we do here, which is research. And I think, for reasons that are self-evident, both COVID-19 and the end of free movement as a result of Brexit threaten this model, and the sector has been working really hard with both UK and Scottish governments about how we can protect our research base, particularly. In the brief time that remains, I just want to sketch out some of the Brexit-related areas for universities in a little more detail. First of all, Horizon Europe, the research and innovation element of European collaboration. I know many of you are familiar with the program, but for those who haven't come across it, it is the European Commission's successor program to Horizon 2020. It is the mechanism through which research is supported across not only the EU, but well beyond, with many third countries participating. We, as UK research-intensive universities, have been very active participant in Horizon 2020. Since 2007, the 24 Russell Group members, of which Edinburgh and Glasgow are members in Scotland, have won 17% of ERC grants, and nearly a fifth of the projects involve one of these 24 UK universities as partners or coordinators. And continued access to Horizon Europe has been one of our key sector asks as part of the negotiations. And on its part, the UK government recognises that the UK is the second largest beneficiary in Horizon 2020. It's been at some points the largest beneficiary, and it's stated publicly that it's in the interest of both parties that the UK continues to play a part in this and similar initiatives, pan-European initiatives such as Erasmus+. However, I think intelligence that we've had suggests that negotiations over UK association are going to prove very bumpy indeed. The EU's demands regarding the financial contribution for association to Horizon Europe are very significant. The system is changing. It will involve an operational levy based on GDP and a participation fee that's set as a percentage of the associated country's operational contribution. In addition, it's the EU Commission is proposing an asymmetric rebalancing mechanism, which will be triggered if the UK's benefits outweigh its contributions. In plain language, this could mean that there would be a net cost of participation, not only for the UK, but also potentially for countries like Switzerland, which could run into several £billion. Now, you don't have to be a Brexiteer, I think, to question whether this is the best possible deal. Now, we as universities remain hopeful that a fair deal for full association can be reached, but we recognise this cannot be achieved at any cost, and it's believe that Horizon Europe will be discussed as part of next week's negotiations, and hopefully an accommodation can be brokered. If not, the UK must have a plan B ready to go from 2021. On Wednesday, the UK government published its R&D roadmap, which contained reassurances in this regard, but it would be deeply, I think, unfortunate if association cannot be agreed. Addressing the funding gap is the only consolation prize available, but it removes a lot of that really fruitful collaboration. Consolation prizes are also an offer when it comes to access to talent. The UK government has now confirmed that students from across Europe will be unable to access home fee status in England from August next year. We are anticipating an announcement on this topic from the Scottish government shortly, perhaps as early as next week. In a bid to soften the blow, the UK government has announced a number of initiatives in an attempt to ensure continued access to talent. And last year, a global talent tier 1 visa was announced alongside the reintroduction of post-study work visas for international students who've completed their studies in the UK. And in addition, this week it was announced that a new Office for Talent is being set up within Number 10. Now, the one advantage for us as universities is that they hopefully will move discussions in this space beyond the exclusive remit of the Home Office, and we hope that may make dialogue easier and will allow some more creative thinking about how the UK can attract and retain talent post-Brexit. And on this point, I suppose it is encouraging that international students who complete a PhD from summer 2021, it was announced this week, can now stay in the UK for 3 years after study. Now, we've pushed for that to be more widely extended to all graduates, but it is a significant first step. And it's really quite, I think, important. I mean, in 2017, the University and College Union surveyed EU academics at UK universities, and over 3/4 said that in the light of Brexit, they were more likely to consider leaving the UK. And anecdotally, I know of many examples where jobs have been turned down and left for exactly that reason. So this is one of the issues that is clearly concerning us. Now, I realize that time is at an end. I want to ensure that everybody gets a fair chance, so I will finish on a more positive note. As an institution, the University of Glasgow is really proudly global and distinctively European, where our outlook as a place of learning, study and research isn't going to change as a result of Brexit, even if certain practical impacts come into force. We're continuing to work with our partners, whether within the Guild of European Research Intensive Universities, which we helped to found with the University of Warwick and King's College London. We are looking at, associating with certain European University Initiative networks, and we are going to collaborate in everything that we do. And we will remain a welcoming and inclusive home for all our European staff, students and colleagues. It's part of what we are, what we'll always be. We'll continue to work collaboratively with our friends and neighbours in EU countries on projects that advance knowledge, which unlock potential and deliver scientific and medical breakthroughs for the benefit of us all. And for any doubters, I think COVID-19 just reinforces how connected we all are. Brexit will have many practical consequences and it will change many things, but it won't unpick that reality that we are connected. So I think universities understand this better than most, and at Glasgow we are committed to continue to play our full role at Scottish, UK and European level. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to any questions.
Right, just since time is passing, can you say a quick word about the advisory council that you and Sir David Edward have been participating in for the First Minister? Just what's its remit?
Yes, very, very happy to, Ian. I mean, the Standing Council was set up literally days by the First Minister, days after the referendum result was known, and as you say, David and I are part of it. A number of experts on trade and are part of it. It is very much an independent group. Our remit is simply to offer advice to the First Minister and ministers on how best to protect Scotland's interests within Europe in the light of the Brexit referendum. At the beginning, a lot of our work was very much focused on providing some of that expert technical advice, because the Scottish Government didn't have probably that internally. I mean, obviously it wasn't set up to have expertise around trade, around issues of this type. Over time, it's developed, the Scottish Government's developed that capacity, so we've become more of an expert sounding board where policy is determined and analysed within government, and then we as a group, we meet probably, you know, we used to meet about every 4 to 6 weeks. We're now meeting every 2 to 3 months. And we essentially act as a sounding board on these issues.
Okay.
And occasionally we will take a position in support of the policy statements. Thank you.
Many, many thanks. Now, time's passing, and I'd like to invite Stephane Bonifassi. Are you there, Stephane? Maître Bonifassi from the Paris Bar.
I am in Paris, sadly. I'm not in Glasgow. I was looking forward to being there and to take advantage of this hospitality you were describing, and I've never been to Glasgow actually, so it would really have been a pleasure to be there. But I'm sure there will be occasions, Brexit or not. I'm going to say it right now. I'm really sorry that Brexit is happening, because I think the Franco-British Lawyers Society is mostly remain, although I know that not all of us share this point of view, but we believe in friendship and cooperation. So I've been asked to touch upon the uncertainties touching Franco-British life and commerce. That's too wide of a topic, so I've decided I would touch on some items, and I think that my experience is the experience of a lawyer in Paris, working regularly with the UK, a litigator, and mostly a white-collar crime defense lawyer, but not only. So I thought I would select a few items. One is generally about the recognition of foreign judgments in civil and commercial matters. I would like to stress that something that is not looked closely at, but that is of importance, I think, is the circulation and recognition of bankruptcy proceedings. And I think the COVID crisis is going to be an important aspect of this, because we will have bankruptcies. And I think that we should pay attention to this topic. I think that because of the expertise, the efficiency of insolvency practitioners in the UK generally, the UK has been a center for restructuring, for efficient insolvencies, and of course the EU regulation on bankruptcy insolvency proceedings was instrumental in allowing the UK to be that center. I would say that European center. and I don't think there is much attention paid to that issue. And I think that when the transition period is over, it is going to create difficulties. And personally, and I'm going to say it because I believe that our insolvency practitioners in France are not as good as the British ones. And sorry for my French colleagues here who will disagree. I know some of them, some of my lawyers colleagues represent insolvency practitioners, French insolvency practitioners. But I do think that the UK, by this expertise they have, was bringing something to the table, and it would be important to have a mechanism in place on that front. Another topic I would want to touch upon, and I'm going to do away with some of the topics I had selected because I know that time is going by. I would mention the money laundering issues. You know, there's a worry on the continent that, you know, the purpose of Brexit, and some have said it actually, was to make the UK a sort of Singapore, right, where deregulation would be happening. I'm glad to see that in the withdrawal agreement, anti-money laundering issues are mentioned, and I think that you know, everyone understands it's of the utmost importance. So I have a feeling I'm going to be optimistic that we are not going to have a Singapore, deregulated Singapore next door across the channel. I would want, I mean, I had mentioned GDPR, but let me turn to the topic I know most, and that has been touched upon by Lord Wolffe. And that's the issue of, you know, criminal cooperation. And I mean, as a defense lawyer, one could say, well, it's a very good thing. You know, my clients, those who are accused, will not be transferred, will not be, evidence will not be retained as easily against them because of Brexit. Now, of course, that opinion would do away with the fact that not only am I a defense lawyer, but I'm also a citizen, and that, you know, impunity is bad. But I think that at the end of the day, there will be disadvantages because of this situation. As Lord Wolffe was saying, I mean, crime is international, particularly in the white-collar crime sphere. There's not a national crime, right? It is transnational. And if it gets more complicated to prosecute those crimes, because, you know, a British citizen will be protected by the lack of efficient mutual assistance, efficient extradition tools, I think there would be a downside for British citizens, actually. And that's the issue I see. Because of what had been put in place, and you know, it's particularly true in France, we have a very serious pre-trial detention issue in France, and not only in France, by the way, in many European countries. And I think it's fair to say that the UK fare better than France anyway. I would say that. Now, if because of the lack of cooperation between the UK and France, a British citizen becomes a suspect, this British citizen will be faced, if there is no proper cooperation, will be faced with a very high risk of pre-trial detention. And I think that's true in France, and that will be true in most European countries, because if the feeling is that if that British citizen goes back to the UK and can't be extradited or if evidence cannot be obtained against that person, well, we're going to keep him, we're going to lock him down, and he's going to cough up with the evidence, basically. I'm putting this bluntly, but I think that we have to be very, very cautious of that issue, and that, you know, the idea that, you know, we shouldn't go into the European Arrest Warrant model to protect our citizens is, I mean, not everything is fine in the European Arrest Warrant world, and we know this, and we know that some countries are issuing those arrest warrants like, you know, like if they were nothing, right? And we are drowning, some enforcement agencies are drowning under these European arrest warrants, and yes, there are issues to be dealt with. And we don't live in a perfect world, but I think that because of the European arrest warrant, because also of some tools that are in place, you know, so some bail measures that are now possible. For example, house arrest. If you want to avoid pre-trial detention, we're going to allow you to be under house arrest. You'll have to be at home every night. That can be done in another European country now. That's possible. If you have to weekly report to the police station, you don't have to do it in France. You can do it in Germany if you're a German resident. And all that is in the interest of those who are accused. And if that is not possible anymore, for those who are going to be caught by European justice systems in Europe, when it comes to British citizens, there is going to be a downside, and that will be a toughened pre-trial detention regime, I fear. That's really, Ian, and unless you want me to go on, but I think we have to leave room for 2 more speakers. That's really what I wanted to say, and I think I can leave it here for now, and I would be happy to respond to questions.
Very good, thank you. I think that I'd like to hold the questions about extradition and judicial cooperation efficiency, and now pass to hearing from another honorary graduate of the University of Glasgow, the Luxembourg citizen who is also a British citizen and is Advocate General in the Court of Justice of the European Union, and that is Eleanor Sharpston.
Thank you very much, Ian. I should point out that I am masquerading as Sophia Sarli, but some of you may know Sophia Sarli. If you do, you know that I don't look like her, and I have tried to identify myself with a nice pair of Luxembourg flags over the back of my head, follow through from our National Day. Citizens' rights is what Judge Forrester suggested I should talk about, and my heart sank because you could do a 2-day webinar on this topic alone. It's not something where you can focus in on exactly how the European Arrest Warrant works and then look at whether the Norway-Iceland model would be an acceptable substitute, for example. And I listened to the Lord Advocate's exposition on that with great pleasure, but I did wish that my topic were as neatly defined and definable as his. Rather than trying to do a detailed summary of where we've got to, which certainly wouldn't fit into the space, I thought I would make some comments about structure and framework and ideas and concerns. And I'd like to start the narrower approach with the idea of free movement of persons and then expand towards citizenship. Now, for those of us who did our European law when it was EEC law, rather old-fashioned this, we were talking about the free movement of economically active persons. And even at that stage, it was extremely clear that people are more complicated than that favorite symbol of The Economist, the widget. Production of widgets can be analyzed in an economics textbook. I speak as a former economist. Let's see what happens when you have a young person full of initiative and drive, and they move to another country as a worker. Well, they go there and they start their job. They pay tax and social security contributions. And then, of course, they go and fall in love with a partner. I'm not going to comment on the sex or the nationality of the partner. Perhaps the partner is a national of the host state. Perhaps they're a third country national. I don't know. Anyway, they get together, they found a family, and in due course they have children. Well, then, of course, there's going to be questions about education for the kids. They have to go to primary school, secondary school. Then there's tertiary education. Is that going to be in the host member state or back home? Maybe elsewhere in the EU? Will the exams that were passed going to be recognized and so on? In the meantime and along the way, there's all the stuff about integration and language issues. There's access to housing. There may be a need for additional vocational training. The work that our enterprising transborder worker is doing may just involve working in the host member state where his employer is based, but, and this is not rare, it may also involve the worker traveling on behalf of his employer to do work in another member state for a longer or a shorter period. There may be periods during which our worker is temporarily unemployed. You know, he may be between jobs, he may need to claim benefit. Perhaps somebody's going to fall sick. That's a terrible thought. Not a difficult thought in present times, but if so, they're going to need treatment. And you know, we all get older, including our parents, and if your parents become elderly, well, they may need to join you, the worker, your family unit, and be cared for. So you've got a lot of detail about both descendant and ascendant relatives. What entitlements do they have? What are their rights? Are those rights, in that rather nasty phrase, are they parasitic rights, or are they sometimes freestanding rights? Maybe my worker is going to decide on long-term residence without, however, wanting or perhaps without being able to take up local citizenship. Not all countries allow you to hold dual nationality, as I have the pleasure and privilege of doing. And of course, you've probably acquired some property, and eventually you get to the end of your working life and you're going to be depending on pension payments. Those pension payments might perhaps be a carefully calculated mixture of what you have contributed to locally and some element of pension that is remitted from the home member state on the basis of your earlier work there. So if you track through the life cycle of my imaginary worker, I think you begin to see just how complicated this all is. And that is why in EU law, we have a fairly complicated, integrated set of interlocking rules, the Treaty Free Movement rights, plus lots and lots and lots of secondary legislation and rather a lot of case law. And if I were trying to characterize the leitmotiven of all of that, it would run something along the lines of equal treatment and equal access and mutual recognition based on a high level of mutual trust, and all of that backed by the knowledge that there is the real right to get your rights enforced if things go wrong. And that enforcement may be via individual private actions before a national court and maybe a reference. Perhaps it's enforcement through infringement proceedings brought by the Commission. But the point is that either way, the case will end up eventually before the Court of Justice in Luxembourg. And the ruling of the Court of Justice on the meaning of your rights under EU law will be accepted and implemented. I'm not suggesting that the system is perfect. No systems are perfect, but mainly the system is there. It wasn't automatic. It wasn't easy. And the case law, if I may say so, the case law bears witness to the fact that both member states and private professional bodies had lots of little rules that actually discriminated against foreigners. Well, that was the narrow version, the rights for the economically active, the free movement rights. And then, of course, there are additional rights that are associated with citizenship of the Union. If I were identifying just 3 examples, I would mention rights for the economically inactive, the student, the pensioner, political rights, because you can vote in local and European Parliament elections, you can take part and become integrated in the political life of your host country. Indeed, you can stand as a candidate in local elections. And there's what you might call the get you out of trouble rights, the fact that overseas, if necessary, you have consulate protection. The point underlying this is, of course, that being a citizen, and that's where matters were, being a citizen is a lot more than being a mere economic agent. So, what awareness has anyone of all of this? I think the answer depends on your exposure to it. Are you a UK citizen who lives and works in the UK, but goes abroad to the Costa Brava or Greece for your holidays? Are you a student who's benefited from studying abroad, whether you did a full degree abroad or you did an Erasmus year? Are you somebody who has exercised free movement rights at some point in the past, but is now back in the United Kingdom? Or are you somebody who was in the middle of exercising free movement rights when the 2016 referendum happened and Brexit happened? Are you one of the EU nationals, the nationals of the EU 27 member states, who is now in the United Kingdom? Are you a UK national in one of the EU 27 member states? And I'd like to link to what Professor Muscatelli was saying a little earlier. I want to stress the economic point here. Free movement rights mean that if prospects don't look good right now in your home country, you can go and earn your living somewhere else, which is to your benefit, but also to the benefit of the host member state's economy. And all of that might actually be rather important in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a former economist, I would respectfully endorse what Professor Muscatelli said. It seems to me that the effects of COVID-19 and Brexit are likely to be cumulative rather than anything else. Obviously, speaking as a Luxembourger, which I have the honor to be, I'm very aware of this cross-border element because Luxembourg runs very happily and prosperously on the basis of having frontier workers from France, Belgium, and Germany. But of course, the UK has been running prosperously on the basis of having Bulgarians coming over to pick fruit and having lots of young professionals from Poland and the Baltic states who've been improving their English by working for a year in some part of the hospitality industry. So you're going to say, but didn't the withdrawal agreement sort all of this out? Well, if you go onto the Commission website, as I did before this webinar, you can find a question and answer document, which is very upbeat. They try to find some specific case examples, and they have chosen examples where, on the whole, providing everything works according to plan, you should be more or less all right. Unfortunately, it is perfectly possible to put together a parallel list of individual examples of people who may or who will fall through the gaps. And there is a lot of that material available via a group which was looking at the rights of the 3 million and which made very detailed submissions throughout the Brexit process. There are a lot of potential loose ends, and some of them will come into the spotlight, and that will happen, I think, because the number of personal permutations on individual circumstances is almost infinite. So what about going forward? What about what happens after the end of the transitional period? And I'm sorry, it is very tedious of me to recall that the transitional period A was meant to be much longer. It was meant to be nearly 2 years, not less than a year. And B, it was meant to enable both sides to implement some clearly defined path forward, hence indeed the UK insistence on calling it the implementation period rather than the transitional period. If we look at what's catching the news, the talk is all about deal or no deal, but what is being discussed in terms of no deal is being discussed almost exclusively in relation to goods and supply chains for goods. This is the discussion about trading on WTO terms, and maybe it won't be as bad as is claimed. And in a very simple and naive way, I'm going to say, and what about the citizens? There is an idea, a strong idea from the UK side of the negotiation, that what would be good to have would be a kind of suite of agreements, each with its own dispute settlement mechanism and nothing to do with the Court of Justice, rather than having a single overarching agreement. And so, for example, within the suite of agreements, there is a draft UK proposal for an agreement on social security. Now, fortunately, and I do mean that word, fortunately, I am not a Brexit negotiator, and I have nothing at all to do with this whole process. I have some other things that are on my plate. So I'm going to restrict myself to the following comments. First, the current EU system works, more or less, precisely because everything interlinks and interrelates. So I do wonder a little bit about getting to the same place via a series of unrelated and non-interlinking arrangements. Second, the EU has some experience of handling issues relating to free movement of persons with third countries, with which the EU has a bilateral arrangement that's meant to be relatively deep. And here I am thinking of the abundant case law that has been generated by the EEC-Turkey agreement. And I would suggest that it's clear from that case law and the terms of that agreement that there is a bit of tension between granting rights to people who are third country nationals and the fact that a third country national, I'm sorry, isn't an EU national automatically entitled to the same treatment as a national of the host state. Third, the current levels of uncertainty are very bad news for lots of individual lives. And that is surely something that matters and that needs to be focused on. Fourth, saying that lots of things can or should be covered by the dictum, trust us, inevitably raises the question, perhaps a slightly unkind question, does what you are doing now confirm or not confirm the proposition that you are, of course, trustworthy? There is a very keen scrutiny of what is happening about implementing the Northern Ireland Protocol. And without getting into the detail of that, let me just say that that scrutiny and what is happening has implications not only for Northern Ireland and peace in Northern Ireland, but more generally for EU-UK relations, and indeed for how the UK will be perceived as a potential partner to new trading arrangements by the wider international community. And if I may be a little light-hearted, you can't go on trading on a past reputation for trustworthiness any more than as an actor you can go on trading on a magnificent performance 5 years ago if since then everything that you've done has been a flop. I could spend time, but I don't think I dare, on the wider issues of associate citizenship. There's a very fine paper by Professor Eleanor Spaventa called Mice or Horses, in the European Law Review, issue 5 of 2019. And there's also a paper by Wolffe Ruben on the feasibility of associate EU citizenship for EU citizens post-Brexit, which is a May 2018 SSRN paper. I would just say that that requires political goodwill on the EU side to play ball, and a certain amount of the stock of goodwill for anything associated with Brits has been used up over the last 4 years. A final very quick mention of 3 cases that are pending before the General Court already. Case T19820, Schindler and others. Case T23120, Price. And case T25220, JU and others. These are direct actions, but I mean, I think they're a tiny foretaste of litigation to come, whether that litigation arrives by the direct action route or whether, as I think more likely, it gets before the Court of Justice through references for preliminary rulings from national courts. I am very sure that my professional colleagues, the lawyers, will be happy and busy. I ask, rather sadly, what about the individual citizens? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
There we go. Thank you very, very much, Eleanor. There's one quick question which I see in front of me, and it's from Laura, who says, if you were to have a bespoke deal, for example, about social security, would that mean we'd need a bespoke deal on social security with 27 separate countries? So I'm trying to.
We are. I'm not very good at technology, and I have 2 computers running separately here. I was trying to unmute the mic with the wrong computer. Sorry about that. I am no expert in social security. From the opinions that I've found myself writing in social security, I have been deeply struck by the complexity of the arrangements and by the amount of negotiation that has been necessary in order to decide exactly what does or doesn't get included, what is or isn't exportable. The social security legislation is replete with annexes that identify individual benefits and say this is covered or this isn't covered. I would think that it depends on whether the bilateral putative future arrangement between the UK and the EU is content to piggyback on the existing nexus of social security arrangements for the EU 27, and to use that as the starting point for the bilateral arrangements. That would come with an obvious price. The price would be that the UK would have to accept that what the EU main Supreme Court, the Court of Justice, said was the meaning of the EU instruments would be binding for the purposes of that bilateral agreement. And I emphasize, in a sense, this is so limited that I confess I've never understood why it's such a big problem. If there were an agreement, let's say, between the UK and Singapore, within that agreement, one would have to accept that what the Singaporean Supreme Court said that Singapore law meant was binding. So that wouldn't be on the interpretation of the agreement, but it would be a starting point as to what one party's, quotes, national, close quotes, law meant. So with this example, if the agreement is as I've just described, then the UK would have to accept the binding nature of the Court of Justice rulings on the meaning of the underlying EU law.
Thank you. Now, I would like to ask our last summariser, my old friend Sir David Edward, a former judge in both our courts in Luxembourg, who has gently offered to provide a summation at the end of this discussion, and after that we can have any further remaining questions that people wish to put. David Edward.
Thank you, Ian, and welcome to all the members and hopefully future members of the Franco-British Lawyers Association. First of all, some general comments. We're in the process of discovering the reality of what Mrs. May said, Brexit means Brexit. We're discovering what it actually means to be a third country vis-a-vis the European Union. There is a great deal of talk, particularly in the assertions we read of the British negotiators, that the EU should recognize that we will have the sovereignty of a third country. I'm not sure that our negotiators recognize that while sovereignty means a freedom from obligations, it also means an absence of rights. In other words, if we're, to the extent that we're sovereign, then we don't have the same rights as other people. If we're entering into an agreement, then we have to recognize that at the basis of any agreement, first of all, there must be a community of interest. Secondly, there must be a reciprocity of rights and obligations. And thirdly, there must be good faith. And there have been hints in the course of the discussion as to whether we are really prepared to accept the obligations already undertaken in the withdrawal agreement, and more particularly whether we're prepared in good faith to do what we agreed to do in the political declaration. But what is very clear from the discussion is that what has existed up to now, and is the product of the 40 years that we have been members of the EEC and now of the European Union, is a very high degree of cooperation, and as Advocate General Sharpson said, a very high degree of interrelationship and interlinkedness. What emerged, I think, from what the Lord Advocate had to say and what Maître Bonifassi also had to say is that if we are going to have an agreement, for example, to maintain the same high degree of interrelationship of extradition, then we have to undertake obligations parallel to the obligations we undertook as a member state. Not least, I think, an obligation to recognize and maintain our obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights. Because if the member states of the Union are going to be prepared to enter into a parallel agreement for judicial cooperation, extradition, and so on, then we have to offer the same guarantees as the member states have to offer to each other under the European treaties and the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. So that is an example of the parallelism between rights and obligations. I think that Eleanor Sharpston also indicated the importance of recognizing the rights of individuals not only as economic operators, but also simply as people. But we should recognize, nonetheless, that the original idea of the free movement of people in the internal market of the European Union was in order to make available skills, the possibility of looking for skills in other countries which don't appear in one's own. For example, as I understand it, the skills of people who are accustomed to train and cultivate vines, who are very important in the cultivation of vines in England, and even to some extent in Scotland, I believe. So you have to recognize that this is an acceptance of availability of skills. And in this connection, talking about trading on WTO terms, we should remember that goods, if that's what we're talking about, don't cross frontiers on magic carpets. They need people to negotiate contracts, people to have subsidiary offices in other countries to make trade easier, people to drive lorries. And we can't suppose that if we trade on WTO terms, that's just going to be goods only. It will involve, there's a message coming. It will involve a recognition that we need free movement of people, and that the people concerned will be the people of the European Union. Another thing that came out of Professor Muscatelli's talk, I think, is that while there have been governmental cooperation, intergovernmental cooperation, there has been a very great deal of cooperation and interrelationship between NGOs, between organizations such as universities, research institutes, and so on. And that is also part of the 40 years of membership. But the interrelationship of these organizations also depends on having the basic groundwork of the treaty relationships. Take away the treaty relationships in, for example, cooperation in academic research, take away free movement of people, then academic research becomes that much more difficult, in the sense that people cannot travel for the purpose of engaging in academic research together. Altogether, I think what comes out of this discussion is that we are only at the beginning of understanding what Brexit means, what will be involved, and what we have to do in the next 6 months, or really only 3 months, to ensure that when we reach the 31st of December of this year, we don't totally fall off a cliff. And one last thing, that if we are going to keep some of the benefits of our 40 years of membership, then we have to be prepared as individuals to insist that the government acts in good faith towards the countries of the EU. That's my summary.
Thank you very much. Let me just make two, I guess you'd say, political points. One is, and I got this from a discussion at the Church of Scotland, bizarrely, sovereignty, okay, it's not, possibly the house is burning down, folks. Okay. One is that no country is entirely sovereign. North Korea is a member of the Universal Postal Union. So when you post a card in North Korea to your grandmother, she will get your card without additional payment. So no country has refrained completely from limiting its freedom of action. So sovereignty these days necessarily, naturally, is pooled sovereignty. And the second thing to say, also a political observation, we didn't 4 years ago vote for anything other than leaving the political institution, which is the European Union. What Brexit meant was the subject of multiple different definitions and predictions, all of them more cheerful than what we're facing today. So, questions. What do we have by way of questions, Mia? You need to unmute yourself.
So we have a few questions that appear as answered but are not answered. If anyone wants to add questions, please add them now. Even if you can't say to hear the answers, they'll be recorded. So one question is, I understand that a lot of scopes of negotiation are in front of British government and EU. I don't know what A means.
Angela Merkel.
Oh, of course, sorry.
Yes.
I'm reading too intently. Angela Merkel told Europeans to prepare a no deal. How do you evaluate this risk since last time a deal could be achieved? Question mark.
Well, I don't see any of our speakers rushing to answer. I think David Edward and Eleanor said it, particularly David Edward. We need to negotiate a deal in good faith. There's a lot of political encouragement to see this as a kind of battle in which plucky Britain is standing up against the foreign hordes of 27. I'm exaggerating a bit, but there is a bit of nationalist sentiment in there. I saw this morning that a minister had said that what had been proposed by the European Union could not be accepted by a democracy. Language like that, which makes people believe that they are at war or getting ready for war, really does not help, because a population that is at war acts differently than a population that is at peace and is being prudently led. So I understand the question, what's the chance of a deal? I think we simply don't know. good sense would suggest that a deal is in everyone's interest, but good sense would also indicate that concessions have to be made. And with respect to the second questions there, what's the situation of Brits living in the 27 and EU 27 living in the UK? There's 4 million people who are in a state of limbo. I deeply, profoundly regret that our political leaders have not collectively produced a solution. And Luxembourg's a small country. At the moment, someone who has the right to is in Luxembourg permanently, a Brit, for example, it may be not permitted for that person to cross the border into Germany with confidence that they will be welcome. And I observe that there is a very big difference between having a right to request and having a right. And that's a profound and important observation.
Wonderful. We have a couple more questions.
Please.
Are we ready? One for Eleanor says, we have touched on dispute resolution. Are we, in your view, in any shape or form, close to something that makes sense? Or are we, with Alice, living in Wonderland in that regard and going to continue to do so in the new world in which we shall have to live? That's from David. Thank you, David. Shall I unmute you, Eleanor? Let me unmute you. Are we both? There you go.
We are now unmuted. I am now unmuted, I think. I would like to issue a disclaimer. I haven't been following each blow-by-blow twist and turn of where we've got to in the current discussions. I hear as a leitmotif that it is anathema to large sectors of those in the political sphere in the UK to contemplate a
Oh no. So that suggests
European Union.
Oh, we lost you for a second, Eleanor.
All right. Have you got me again?
Yeah.
Okay. I read in the press. I know what I read in the press like everyone else, right? I don't have any other form of information or special source. From what I read in the press, I see a continuing message coming from political sectors in the UK to the effect that being prepared to consider a ruling from the Court of Justice of the European Union as in any way binding is absolute anathema. And I would like to underline a difference, which I think is an important difference, between a situation in which the Court of Justice would be ruling on the meaning of a bilateral international agreement between the EU and the UK. And there I can see that the party that wasn't the EU might have an objection to that. That's example one. But example two is, as I understand it, much closer to the actual present situation, which is that the EU side of the discussion is saying, look, we have a court which for the last 70 years has produced authoritative rulings on what EU law means. And that is the Court of Justice of the European Union. And it has to be still able to give authoritative rulings in the future. We are not prepared as a matter of EU constitutional law to contemplate a situation in which a body other than the Court of Justice of the European Union gave a definitive ruling on what EU law means, because that is our constitutional system. I go back to my example of Singapore and the Singaporean Supreme Court ruling on the meaning of Singapore law. You know, every legal system has a Supreme Court which is responsible for ensuring that there is a uniform and coherent understanding of what its national law means. And if there is a hope that the EU is suddenly going to move away from that position and be prepared to have, for example, some arbitration body saying what EU law means as a binding, ultimately authoritative ruling, I do not think that that is very likely to be accepted by the EU 27. Whether it should be labelled as Alice in Wonderland or some other fabulous land, I don't know. But it doesn't seem to me to be very likely.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. I'm going to unmute Ian so that he can.
Right.
There you go.
I had a little crash there. Are there any other questions? I know that our participants have different obligations, and I don't want to keep people, but I don't want to cut off any useful discussion.
There are a couple of other questions, and I have one too, but I'll save mine. So Ewan Hussein says, what area do you think needs to be addressed that still hasn't been covered by the UK in their draft agreements? What is an unintended consequence of leaving the EU at this time that in your view is the most serious? So that's to anyone who wishes to reply. So 2 questions in one.
Well, I'm sure there's quite a long list. One is state aid. State aid is an important part of the regulation of any economy. The rules of the WTO on subsidies and countervailing subsidies are clunky and just hopelessly inappropriate. The UK in February, when it made its shopping list, nothing was said about state aid. Yet, especially in the current context, it's obvious that some kind of coordination on the subject of state aid is going to be necessary. Now, what's most important? Well, I think one extremely important thing is what we've been talking about, the status of the 4 million people outside their homeland, the country of their birth. And I see that Anton has got something to add to the shopping list. So I've given 2 points. Anton.
Thank you, Ian. I was going to just amplify on your point about state aid, because I agree that this is one of the key areas. I mean, under the UK proposal, you know, all the level playing field areas are excluded from the dispute settlement provisions, and while this is, I think, you know, very much in line with the EU President, it would leave both sides without the ability to take any coercive action. I think this is one of the key areas, and it relates to what Eleanor was saying earlier. I mean, there's 2 very different visions, I think, here around this. I mean, the UK is pushing essentially a WTO-style dispute resolution agreement, whilst in reality, the EU wants, in the cases where the substantive breaches, to have a more concerted action where the damage might be considerable to particular areas.
Yep. Any other? Yes, David.
Me? Yeah, I would just say on the subject of dispute resolution, and it's going to be important immediately because of the measures that have been taken to react to COVID. To a great extent, the rules on competition and state aid have been relaxed or even ignored in reaction to COVID. Now, the question is, how is that going to settle down in the future? And it isn't at all obvious that the member states and the undertakings, the firms and businesses in the member states are going to be prepared to go back to the strict application of competition law and state aid law and so on as they have been relaxed for the purposes of COVID. In relation to the dispute resolution between the UK and the EU after the end of this year, I have spent a good deal of time more recently, since I left the court, in the field of international arbitration. And if anyone has the idea that international arbitration is an easy and friendly way of dealing with disputes, they need to think again. It's very laborious, it's very paper-driven, and it does not necessarily produce harmony.
Well said. And here's another question. Are cooperation and trade agreements with the European Union accommodating for the UK's shortly newfound liberty to pursue diplomatic or trade relations that could take a divergent direction to the European Union? I think that's probably a question for our Advocate General. So what about tensions between trade agreements with the European Union and the idea of the UK's new liberty to pursue its own trade agreements?
Let me see if I can.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
Have you now unmuted? I thought I'd unmuted myself. Okay, very good. Thank you for passing me that particular hospital task, Mr. Chairman. I think the only answer I can give to it is that if you start from a starting point of total sovereignty, regained sovereignty, you can decide what the deal is that you want. But that may not be the same as the deal that you get, because all discussions involve two partners. First, very obvious point. Second point, some deals involve particular arrangements with one partner, whereas other deals involve other arrangements with another partner. I'm trying to avoid saying the words chlorinated chicken, and I'm failing to say, not to say them. So if you want to have an arrangement with a partner under which certain things are permitted because the economic weight is that way round, that's absolutely fine. But there is also the peculiarity that the UK has a land frontier with an EU member state called Ireland, that land frontier being on the island of Ireland between the Republic and Northern Ireland. And if there is going to be a deal in which certain products which would not be allowed into free circulation within the EU are going to be imported, then the obvious question is, how do you make sure that those products do not in fact get across a frontier into the EU 27? I'm delighted that Sir David, by the way, made, with his usual very pungent way, he made the point that goods don't turn up on a magic carpet. Indeed, they don't. They get moved across frontiers by people driving trucks or taking stuff across, as happened in Northern Ireland, taking stuff across any one of about 200 places along the border where you can take goods across without the slightest difficulty. It is a matter of what is wanted, but also recognizing, and this is important, recognizing that saying you want X often comes with a price. If you're prepared to pay the price for getting X, that's fine. But it's not realistic to think that you can turn up with a wish list and expect that you will be given your wish list without any strings, without any conditions, without any counterclaims. That is not realistic.
I think that's where the UK has gone wrong in its negotiations. If only it had known that.
Can I just add, free trade is a complete misunderstanding of the real world. Trade is not free anywhere. And if the UK wants to trade freely, both with the EU and with other third countries, then it has to recognize that there will be rules in relation to both sets of relationships. So trade is in every case, even under the WTO, regulated. And so it's this idea of some global free trade ambition is mysterious to me, because it's not connected with reality.
And maybe we could add the observation that that China and the United States, which each have been promoted as admirable trade partners, have not, at least recently, shown great enthusiasm for meticulously respecting the deals to which they have signed up. Now, we're almost at an end. Are there any other questions which people have to put?
There are two questions that say that they're answered, but they're not answered. Shall I just read both of those?
Yes, please.
How do you see the situation of British people who are living in the EU is one, and then the other is, how do you qualify the situation of European citizens who are living in the UK? So
I think those were already, I tried to answer those. It's 4 million people, and their interests are really, really important. And they are living at the moment in a state of limbo. There's not going to be cattle trucks. There's not going to be mass deportations. But individual citizens, millions of them, are uncertain whether they will easily get the right to remain where they are living and working and where their families are. And that's something, especially after the Windrush scandals in the UK, when Caribbean immigrants to the UK entirely legitimately, 40 years later, were told they had to leave because they didn't have the papers which demonstrated, in the view of the Home Office, their right to remain. That's a grave scandal. And that's why I said there is a huge difference between having a right, an absolute right, and having only a right to request the exercise of a discretion. And that's a big worry. And there's litigation going on, a number of litigations going on before the Court of Justice and the General Court of the European Union concerning exactly those questions in the context of Brexit. So,
and just to add, in relation to Anton's interest, one of the most important things is not just the right of the individuals who are operating at the moment, it's their children's right to education, their children's right to university education, and the right of free movement between universities. And that is something which simply I have not seen discussed.
Absolutely.
Anton, you want to add, or?
No, it's absolutely right. And actually, there is a useful counterexample, because we see at the moment, when we have non-EU citizens that have joined us in our universities as members of staff. I mean, these are the preoccupations they've had for some time, especially as you see, NHS charges and other introductions of all sorts of other barriers to them. It's definitely had an impact on their choices as to whether to stay in the UK or whether not to stay in the UK. So I absolutely agree with David. I think this is an area that's going to be watched very closely by colleagues who have moved to the UK a few years ago and are obviously worried about their children's rights as well.
Very good. So I think that, Mia, we've come to the end of the questions, I believe.
we have. If you want one more, I have one more, but if you would rather close, we can close.
One quickly, yes.
It's just, Eleanor mentioned the case law with Turkey. and that sort of we haven't done ourselves any favors in sort of promoting our reputation in the UK at the moment. But we are different from the UK, is different from Turkey. And I was wondering, for everyone really, in which ways do you think the UK will be treated the same as Turkey? And in which ways do you think it will be treated differently?
Sorry, my comment was not about whether the UK should be treated in the same way as Turkey or not. My comment was to point out that on a relatively straightforward agreement, the EEC-Turkey agreement is a 1964 agreement which was drafted at a time when it was envisaged that there would be 3 stages towards Turkey becoming an EEC member state. So it was meant to be a friendly agreement creating a deep relationship, and that was the point of parallel. I was pointing out that even under that agreement, when you started to try to work out what actually happens with free movement of workers and what actually happens in terms of rights of people changing jobs and rights of the people who are children of Turkish workers and so on, that agreement had spawned a very elaborate case law. But to move across to the other half, as it were, of your question, you know, are there parallels between the UK and Turkey? No, there are not parallels between the UK and Turkey in the sense that Turkey is a long way away from the UK and in a very different state of economic development, and there are some other issues. The UK is on the EU's doorstep with an awful lot of links thus far, and I think the phrase "we want a special relationship" possibly cuts both ways. A special relationship because you're close and because you're a member state that has now left doesn't necessarily, I think, or wouldn't to me automatically mean that you could look around to see what various arrangements have been made with different trading partners the world over, and then say, oh, I like that bit of EU-Canada. How about that bit of EU-Norway? How about that piece of EU deal with fill in your favorite other member state, right? Other third country trading partner. Because the situation of the UK is unique, but saying that it's unique doesn't mean that you can have all the best bits from all the deals, because that's not the way life is. It means that the arrangement that needs to be put together has to take account of geographical proximity, of the complexity that arises out of 40 plus years of membership, of a whole range of concerns which are not purely and exclusively economic, and nor should they be. So yes, it is very special, and it isn't a matter of taking whether the model be EEC Turkey or EU Canada or something else. If you want an off-the-shelf deal, there are certain off-the-shelf deals, and you can see what they've got in them, but that isn't what is wanted from the UK side. And what is wanted from the UK side, as far as I know, and I can only reiterate, I am probably further away than any of you from the process of what's actually going on, right? But as far as I can read about what's going on, what is wanted from the UK side is in fact something very bespoke and special. But bespoke and special doesn't mean every desirable bit of every deal that's already out there. And I think I'd make the final point. The UK, during its participation in the European project, in the EEC, the EC, and then the EU, has frequently managed to strike a special deal, which has been very advantageous. It had special treatment in relation to Schengen, special treatment in relation to the pound, special treatment in relation to justice and home affairs. You know, one could make the list. So if you like, it was wearing a bespoke Savile Row tailored suit, not an off-the-peg suit from M&S, but a Savile Row job. but that job was available to the UK as a member state, as part of an ongoing project, as a participant in an ongoing project where, you know, in order to keep a particular big member state on board, you try to make some arrangement which is going to take the show forward. That is not the reality of the world after the 31st of January 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add? I think the point is good faith. What I get the impression of from what Mr. Barnier is saying, I thought we had agreed all this in the withdrawal agreement. I thought we'd agreed we were going to have a level playing field, etc. And now apparently you don't think we've agreed it. So the problem is whether we will be trusted. And to the extent that we are not trusted, we will not get deals.
And if I can add, Ian, just very briefly, I mean, I think Eleanor has put a finger on it. I mean, given where we are, the depth of integration of trade, and it's really very difficult to see, you know, any way out of this unless the level playing field promises that seem to have been made in the political declarations are kept. And if they're not, I mean, this is where you see, in fact, some of the discussion as to what might happen if the transition period runs out, that perhaps what will happen might be, in order to deal with the faith issue, that good faith issue that David mentioned, one possible interim deal might be essentially, well, we'll roll forward, but if we observe any deviation in terms of your existing arrangements in terms of level playing field variables, then it's all bets are off, and you effectively, there is no deal. But you know, that could be one way in which negotiations are kept alive beyond the transition period.
Well, now, I think we should come to an end. I wish to make two big thank yous and make two big requests. I want to thank David Guild, invisible, but one of the midwives who brought this exercise to a successful completion, to Sophia, intermittently invisible, and Mia, regularly visible, for technically getting this show on the road. And deep, deep thanks to our 5 speakers. I was afraid that this might be just preaching to the choir, some familiar stuff, but I think we've had a really useful and fruitful discussion, and each of you have prepared for it well, and I'm really, really grateful. Those are not formules de politesse words, they are reality. And my 2 requests, first to the participants, if you found this format interesting and useful, and if you'd like to keep on the discussion, maybe on different topics, would you be kind enough to send us an email saying so and indicating what topics you'd like to cover on a future occasion? Because we've now, with a little bit of clunkiness, managed to make this work, and we can, if we want, make it happen again. And secondly, if you're not a member of the Association des juristes franco-britanniques, the Anglo-French Franco-British Lawyers Society, if you're not a member, you're most welcome, and I encourage you to take steps to become a member. And with those thanks and those 2 requests, I bring this interesting webinar to an end, and thank you all for your participation.